with Central. It's 5:30 and time for the morning news.
Good morning. America, Britain, France and Russia have told Iraq the airstrikes won't be the last if it continues to defy the international community. In particular, they've warned Saddam Hussein he risks further attacks if he again puts anti-aircraft missiles into the southern no-fly zone or if he continues to flout the Gulf War ceasefire terms. Ambassadors from the four powers delivered the warning to Iraq's UN envoy in New York. It came just a few hours after more than 100 Allied warplanes pounded 4 targets inside Iraq's southern no-fly zone. Apart from the Navy aircraft from the carrier Kitty Hawk, warplanes also flew from bases in Saudi Arabia, including 4 RAF Tornadoes. They bombed the Al Amara airbase, one of 6 targets below the 32nd parallel. The Americans say aircraft from other partners in the Gulf War coalition, which includes Saudi Arabia, also took part in yesterday's mission, but they won't say from which countries. ITN's Terry Lloyd was the only British reporter aboard the Kitty Hawk when the strike was launched. He's just sent us this report.
In a blaze of glory and coalition pride, 36 aircraft blasted off from the Kitty Hawk, heading for military targets in southern Iraq. The launch had been given White House approval 48 hours before, but bad weather had intervened to delay the attack. Once underway, the planes thundered apart at 30-second intervals. Amongst them, the early warning craft, the jammers, the bombers and fighters. Over half of the ship's aircraft had been called into action. The crew had been diverted from the coast off Somalia, their new role to head the task force monitoring Operation Southern Watch. As the flight deck bustled with aircraft and activity, we were allowed to film, but not to report. A news blackout had been imposed by defense chiefs in Washington, and nothing could be relayed until their embargo was lifted when the mission was declared a success. The mightiest weapons on board, these 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs, were tenderly wheeled to the lift shafts. A few of the handlers insisted on their own parting shots, signing their names on the tail fins.
As these bombs surface for the first time this trip, it's clear that the coalition has decided enough is enough, and this is how they intend to answer Saddam's provocation.
They were all destined for strategic Iraqi military targets, an inevitable response to Saddam's UN violations. The bombs were so heavy there could be no turning back. They would have to be dropped on their targets or ditched out at sea. The risk of a bad landing on return was too high to take. The commander of the task force then explained why so much force would be used.
The goal of this specific strike is to take out the C-cube, the radars, the missile sites that have been involved in setting up a pattern of defensive activity in South Asia, rather in southern Iraq, that specifically threatens the forces that we've had conducting Southern Watch. There may be political goals in terms of making statements to the Iraqi government, but I can't answer any of those.
Luck, skill and planning were on their side as the first of the 36 planes returned home safe and sound, mission accomplished. Not such a happy homecoming for all 36. Some missed the brake wire and were forced to bounce back for a second attempt. But for most, like the E-2C Hawkeye early warning reconnaissance planes, which had paved the way to Iraq and back, the message was loud and clear.
How did it go? It's pretty interesting. As planned? Yeah, as planned. Did you meet any resistance? Can't comment on any of that stuff. Thanks.
Others, however, revealed it all without saying a word. A simple greeting to mark a momentous night. Terry Lloyd, ITN, in the Persian Gulf.
And Terry Lloyd is on the line now from Bahrain. Terry, those airmen seemed pretty relaxed about it, but presumably morale is pretty high.
Indeed it is, John. I spent most of my time before the launch with the legendary Sundowners Squadron. They're the flyers who take off with F-14 Tomcats. They knew they had a job to do when the ship was diverted here from Somalia. On Tuesday night, the mission was planned to take off. 29 aircraft were supposed to launch on that night. Only one went into the air before the mission was aborted. The men then were keyed up, ready to go last night. There were nerves, obviously, but the atmosphere was electric. Adrenaline was buzzing throughout the whole ship, and the men were ready for it. Off they went, and they came back, and you could tell by the beaming faces and the gestures you've just seen that they regarded as mission accomplished.
Terry, are they expecting that that was a one-off operation, or is there more to come in their view?
Well, that's interesting, John. In the ready room of the Sundowners Squadron, whilst we were in there, chalked up on their board was a little message from the commander saying, when you're back, get some sleep, get as much as possible, because if we don't get the right guarantees, you'll be flying again. And we take that to mean that unless Saddam Hussein has got the right answers for the Pentagon and for the coalition, then these pilots will be on standby to take off again and perhaps hand out one more round of punishment for him.
Thank you, Terry. President Bush says the strike shows that America is serious in demanding that Saddam comply with UN resolutions and the Gulf War ceasefire terms. And the president is sending an armoured cavalry battalion of 1,300 troops with tanks to Kuwait to deter any further Iraqi raids. Mr. Bush says he has no regrets about taking action just a week before leaving office. President-elect Bill Clinton has expressed his full support, saying he would do the same. ITN's David Chater is in Washington.
Two complexes.
Mission accomplished. The message from U.S. Central Command in Florida. The general in overall charge of the operation said 4 fixed missile sites had been targeted, along with a number of additional mobile sites. All of them had been taken out.
Based on pilot reports, based on what we know to be true, we believe that it has been successful. That's cautiously optimistic, I would say.
I will continue to insist that he abide by these resolutions.
President Bush, with only a week left in the White House, said he had no reservations about releasing warplanes once again against Saddam Hussein.
But I would think that soon Saddam Hussein would understand that we mean what we say and that we back it up. And I have no intention of changing that approach to life in the last 6 or 7 days of my presidency.
The man who will be taking over in Washington next week, President-elect Bill Clinton, had the same message for Baghdad.
So under the United Nations resolution, conflict is illegal. It's a matter of international law. And he just, for reasons I don't understand, just keeps pushing and pushing.
The U.S. is also sending a battalion-strength task force into Kuwait, some 1,500 soldiers, to reinforce the coalition troops already stationed there. It was the cross-border incursions by the Iraqis to retrieve weapons and equipment from Kuwait that sparked the Allied retaliation. It was a deliberate breach of the United Nations ceasefire resolution after the Gulf War, a breach the Iraqi ambassador to the UN has promised will not happen again.
Well, it's a pity to find that military actions are replacing diplomatic efforts. We and the Iraqi Foreign Service always thought that there should be always reason to work out matters and problems in a peaceful way.
Take them out. Definitely take them out.
That's the feeling of the majority of the American public.
Just do it and get it over with. Don't go in and have to go in 6 months later.
I don't think Saddam Hussein has learned his lesson.
The White House has said no further warning will be given if Iraq violates UN ceasefire resolutions again. David Chater, ITN, in Washington.
And live now to Washington. David, strong words from the White House. What is the latest from Iraq's man at the UN?
Yes, John, the Iraqi ambassador to the United Nations has within the last hour sent a note to the President of the Security Council. It promises that there'll be no more border incursions, and the UN will be allowed to fly its own teams, its own weapon inspection teams, into Iraq on its own planes. But in the last few minutes, the ambassador, Nazir Hamdoun, said that the no-fly zones in the north and south of Iraq cannot be tolerated. Those were his words. They cannot be tolerated. He said Iraq had a right to show that it is a sovereign state, and he warned that Iraq would make what he called a demonstration of its resentment. He also said that the new border between Iraq and Kuwait that's due to come into force on Friday was a recipe for disaster. So if the Allied retaliation was meant to be a shot across the bows of the Saddam Hussein regime, from those words it doesn't seem to have worked.
David, we have a new president there in just a matter of days. Will the policy remain the same?
Indeed, John, there's a front-page story in today's New York Times. It's an interview with the President-elect Bill Clinton, and it says that he is prepared to prosecute another ground war against Saddam Hussein if he continues to flout the Gulf War ceasefire. But according to the interview, he says he is going to judge Saddam Hussein by his behavior. It's his actions, not his words, they're going to move Bill Clinton.
Thank you, David. Coming next on Morning News, the latest from Baghdad, plus the other main news. Join us after the break.